Okay, for people joining this meeting, we are doing a review of some Wolfram language functionality, and somebody needs to mute themselves there. The topic we're talking about today is progress indicators. We could call it progress about progress. Okay, so let's talk about, boy, there's a lot of levels of opening to do here. Okay. Right.
So, Julio, did we have any specific questions up here before we go to grid panel, or did we just want them all there in case?
Just a recap.
Yeah, just a recap. Okay. So, so these are sort of, the main kinds you see, and then there are a few sort of more specialized ones you see for, whatever case.
So one of the questions here, I mean, the goal is to have an increasing number of kind of, my point of view, and maybe people disagree, my point of view is whenever we can, so long as the thing is not going to leave its detritus in the notebook, and so long as it's not going to cause the notebook to jump around like crazy, showing progress is always a good thing. Does anybody disagree with that claim?
As long as it's possible, yes, of course.
Well, and as long as it doesn't slow things down.
As well.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, but so, and so long as it doesn't make the notebook jump, which is another issue. I mean, because what we don't want is the thing, it keeping on, it's running one map, it's running another table, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what I've found, like I've been doing lots of parallel maps, and I've been using this parallel map monitored functionality in the function repository. Very, very useful. I mean, I basically want that every time I'm doing a parallel map. By the time I'm doing a parallel map, it's going to take significant time. If it wasn't, then I wouldn't be doing a parallel map. It wouldn't be worth it. So, that's that's part of what anyway, so I mean, I think it's worthwhile. So you've shown here evaluating table. I mean, the question is, to what level are we going to try to put progress indicators? Because I would claim if you've got a giant table, I think it'd be very useful to have a progress indicator, so long as you can have enough of an indication of what table we're talking about here.
That's custom text. I just put it there. Like you can customize it.
I know, but yeah, okay.
I mean, the idea is basically that the simple panel is something that, like, for example, you're doing a video map. There's you can either say, like, we are mapping over frames and show a progress bar, and there's the alternative is the other design, which is a kind of more informative things when you want to give extra information. So which is the next section, and
okay.
Is the grid design.
But I think there's a point here, which is that just like we have echo, for instance, which is a very successful function.
Right, but we don't use it in system functions, right? We use it to debug our code.
It's a user level. It's a user level thing, right? But what I'm imagining is that we could imagine having a thing saying, show progress, and then it's a piece of code, or something like that. It would do its best to show progress for that top level function, which might or might not be possible. It may or may not know how to do it. And it could be that show progress will just say, all it will say will be evaluating blah, blah, blah. And it won't be able to give a percentage complete or anything like that. Am I making sense?
Well, yeah, I don't know how practical that is. I mean, I think it's probably better to add options or have things automatically show their progress that can show their progress.
Well, but you see, sometimes I know that this is going to be a long computation.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, this would be very useful. I would just sprinkle it into code, just like I sprinkle an echo into code. And actually, to be honest, this would be it's like a checkpoint of this is, we reached a particular point. We're entering this code here. It just says what we're entering, and it knows when this is finished, right? So it can say the thing that's being enclosed here is being computed, and that will be very useful.
And but then it stays or it disappears as soon
No,
as
it
it's-
disappears. Disappears.
Yeah,
But
So
the whole
you-
point is,
that's a possibility.
right, it's literally, in fact, that will be a very useful piece of functionality. It's just like I'm in this code block, and then you sprinkle it and you say, where's my code spending time? Let me just wrap a show progress around this, and then I see, oh, it's stuck in that code block. I like this idea. Okay, but so now,
right, but right. I mean, Jeremy Davis is here. Billy is here. I mean, we're I would like to focus on the visual aspect of progress
Okay,
indicators
all right,
in this
fine.
meeting.
The yeah, Steve on our live stream is saying that show progress should go look at what Expert is and try and figure out how to show the progress when it can. I completely agree with that. And it will, there'll be some things where it does a better job than others, and some it will just say, all I know is that we just went into this function.
Mhm.
Okay, visual. Okay, so let's take a look at visually what we're talking about here. Ethan on our live stream is saying, please add ETAs by default. Yes, I mean, that's an interesting, I know that for, look, I'll just show you this function of parallel map monitored. I mean, let me comment on two things about this, okay? So let's look at parallel map monitored. Wow, okay, it's better to actually see it running. Never mind. Okay, so let's just do, well, you'll see a bunch of things happening here probably. Like the rather horrifying, what can I do? I can just say pause of 5 or something. Actually, no, that's not going to work. I should say parallel map monitored. So I need to do that. Wow, this is a little bit funky. Map to cost range of 1,000 or something. What am I seeing here? Why am I not seeing it doing anything?
Isn't already a map, or you do need to add?
Oh my gosh. Silly me. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so this, I don't know why it's, okay, so there. So that gives an ETA, and I like that. I found it very useful.
In the actual implementation, we typically do have, you see, when you have that the time thing, there's elapsed time, remaining time. So we typically do that.
But that's not an ETA. That's remaining time. That's different from an ETA. The issue is, do people want an ETA? I mean, for me, okay, seeing the ETA is somewhat useful. Like I see, oh, it's going to be 10 minutes. It's going to be done at 2:30 or something. As opposed to it's going to be done in 5 minutes. That's the difference.
No, yeah, we can definitely add that. It's.
I'm not sure if it's a good thing. I mean,
my instinct is that I would rather have the time remaining. I mean, usually when I see an ETA, it's like, oh, okay, well, what's the current time? How much into the future is that?
Yeah, actually, multiple people on a live stream are supporting the idea of an ETA. I mean, look, for GPSs, I remember early GPSs said time to destination. That was their primary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Later GPSs almost always say ETA. I mean, it's in that case, at least it's, I mean, if it's like, is this going to be done before my next meeting starts type thing?
Mm-hmm.
But both are useful. Okay, both are useful.
I mean, there's no problem. You can have as many keys as we like if you think they're useful.
But ETA is not useful for seconds, right, or even short
no,
minutes.
Absolutely
it's
not.
Only when
ETA
it's a
is
long
only
time.
useful when it's in the minutes or or hours.
Yeah.
It's also only useful when it's fairly accurate. Okay. All right. So what the things at the top you were just this was just for orientation or what?
Yes. What we currently have. These all. So these graphical elements are what we have already, and all the new graphical elements that you're going to see are proposals or new things we need.
Okay, but so just to understand these have not been installed in all the places they're supposed to be installed. Is that a true statement?
Yes, because we are still working on the progress indicator.
Okay, fine. But I mean, there's an internal
But they have
API.
been installed in some places, and there's a list at the bottom of the notebook of places where they have been installed.
Okay, fine. And another question: the places where there are existing progress monitors which don't follow these patterns, are those known?
Yes.
For yes.
Yeah.
And
I
then in
would
fact,
say-
part of the reason for this new grid panel is to encompass some of those, like the neural network or the machine learning functions that.
Okay. Yeah, well, so this one, and definitely by the time you're doing this level of detail, you should have an ETA here. Okay, so what are we really looking at? What's the console? Gosh, what is all this stuff? Help. Oh, I see. This is the thing for the command line.
Right.
Is this implemented now? Is this what this is
Yes.
doing?
It's in
And
prototype.
is this using some weird cursor control to go back and, in its time machine, go back and add things here?
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why we need. And actually, I saw Konstantin just added something to the prototype last night, so that we may be able to push this out further than. But right now we have this sort of working on common Unix terminals, but there are still some unsolved problems.
Is there still an etc. term cap out and about in the world from like 1980 or something?
Yep.
Okay.
Although it's probably mostly term info these days, or rather, yeah. So my Linux box has a term info, but not a term cap.
Okay, so this thing here, evaluate with progress, that is the internal API. That's the internal function for doing this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And that has all of this detail about what it's actually going to show.
Yep.
It has two syntaxes right now. I mean, we don't want to linger too much on the syntax, but the panel thing is constrained, and it will do certain things based on the specific keys that you use, while the grid is freeform, and you can put whatever you want into that.
Okay.
Right. So we had some questions about the grid above.
Which grid above? Well, I mean, are we ready? Should I be scrolling down and looking at this?
No,
section?
you should be scrolling up.
Okay. Just tell me what to do.
So right. So open the static section that's in prototype. Right. So this is, I guess, a version where we're headed towards.
Okay. So one question is the title, right? You're explaining what the thing is somehow.
Right.
Whereas in these, what is our pattern for explaining that? I mean, because when you're saying importing or computing
is just a key that is displayed if you don't put any text. If you fill in the text key, you will have
So in terms of usage, it seems to me, if there is something right there on the input line of the REPL, like import blah, 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 saying to people, oh, your import is taking whatever is kind of silly, right? On the other hand, if the import was deep inside a piece of code, you've got to tell them what it is that's messaging you, what it is that you're showing progress about. So to my mind, there are actually two different cases, and that goes along with this sort of show progress wrapper, where it's like, okay, in other words, what I'm saying is if it's right there at the top level, I don't think you have to explain what it is that's giving you the progress information. But if it is deeply nested, you do need to have some kind of header saying what it is that's giving the
right. But import doesn't know whether it's at the top level or whether it's
but I understand that. But whatever the displayer is,
right. But import is the displayer, right? When you import certain kinds of slow things, it automatically puts these up, right? That was the whole point of this project.
Well, okay, I understand that. I'm asking the question: can it know if it's at the top level? I understand that it can't know, but maybe something in the chain of that does the display can know. I mean, for example, at the very trivial level, I mean, look, there are ways it could know by it sending back a hash of itself and being compared with a thing that is looking from the top at the, when it's actually giving the final display. How important do we think it is, UX-wise, the thing I'm just describing? I mean, I would hate it. I mean, go ahead. What do you think?
Well, right, but it normally doesn't say importing, right? It says like preparing, right? It's Julio, can you give a video example off the top of your head, or Sean?
If you export a video, it says like pre-processing video frames and then writing video frames, and you have a bar, and it ends when all the video frames are written.
Okay,
or
well,
if you do,
fine, because that function is probably one of the ones that it's your sort of top function, and it's in, you know what it's doing. But if that was part of some giant workflow,
yeah, we have a point, actually, a discussion point about this, which is the last one on the agenda, which is a multi-step computations, and yeah, we also want a design for that. Actually, that's a I don't know if you want to discuss it now. We can. It's kind of orthogonal to the other one. So,
well, I think the
if you
thing that
look at
I'm
the
responding
multi-step
to is this
computation.
question about, does it have a giant header that says my computation, or does it have no header at all? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, this is a design that currently is in.
I know. So I'm
we are
pointing
free.
out.
We can take it or not. I'm
Right.
trying to
That's
think.
No.
The-
I'm describing when do we think we want a big header and when do we not
Okay.
want the header.
Well, so what do we? So why don't we open up like classify? Right. Classify is one of the guys that.
But is it in here?
No. As in the ref page for classify.
Okay.
Right. So what does it currently do? If we evaluate one of those examples.
Classify
By
progress.
progress.
I'm not that keen on that. I'm not that keen on the way that header looks either.
Right.
That header is like that header is good if it's like you didn't know classify was going to be called. I'm telling you, big story, this is classify that's running, right? As opposed to, of course I know classify is what's going on because it's the only thing I typed in which case it's kind of stupid looking that it's got a big kind of thing that says,
although I will point out that technically it's not the only thing you typed in because set is the top level head of the input expression. Right. So exactly what you mean by I'm the topmost thing is
a little bit obscure. I admit, it's a little bit
yes,
obscure, but I think that there are heuristics that I can imagine. And I mean, the whole point of this is, so okay, let me just mention one computable issue here. Okay, I do think that something we need to work towards is the symbolic logging framework, where we're capable of writing anything that is being written as a message out to the screen is also be capable of being logged for batch jobs. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And we might very well want to checkpoint some of these messages saying computing 40%, 50%, whatever, because if you're running a batch job and it ran for 6 hours, it's really useful to you to know that it got to 60% and then crashed. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, I mean, just bearing that in mind. Okay, so coming back over here. All right, so I get it that this is a big header situation with classify, as opposed to import, which I think has no big headers. It just says, or video.
Panel. Yeah.
So I mean, like let's do this for video, for example. If I go to video, and what would I do? I would take the example video, for example, and what would I do with this? I would say
you can export it to something.
I prefer not to do that because I don't want to leave a bunch of crud on my disk, but I'll export it to a temporary file. That's probably a mistake. I'll probably
just use create file, which will create the file without opening it, and then
Okay, so now what I do is I say export that video to this create file. I wouldn't even know what the file is. Is that going to work?
Well, you need. Oh, you might need to give it a format since it doesn't have an extension.
Right. Oh, okay. Give me a format.
MP4.
Okay. So if this was, I mean, that's nice. That's good. An ETA would be nice here. I mean, that looks pretty nice, what that is doing there. And in a sense, what that's doing is it's implicitly telling me this is a video, right? So if the classifier said, computing classification or something like that. I'm implicitly being told that rather than having this great big, you've got a big title header there. Am I making sense?
Yeah. What I had there is basically the current. Like I just took the code and changed a bit the code of the current panel that classifies.
Okay, so this might be an alternative thing here that has a less. I just don't think we need that big boom thing there. But also we need to know whether this is going to be a ... type thing, which I think it should be, and this is just an additional information panel. What's that gray? I mean, that blue.
That's a later point. Ignore it for the time being. Sorry. We have a single mockup for multiple things, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Fine. So what are we supposed to be looking at here? So what I'm saying, I think, is what we want visually is the same kind of wording of computing blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some of those will even have their summary, elapsed time, blah 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 blah, and then underneath is a panel with more detail. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and do we want that always open? Because the
panel with more detail?
Yes, in this case.
Which case?
Like this one that you're looking at.
Right. So collapse and extended are the same panel in two different states.
Well, I don't like. I think that this needs to be a little bit more explicit than this. I mean, I think it should have a more something word because it wasn't obvious what this was. I mean, in terms of, is it the case that we can save? I mean, that it is more efficient. We're not then generating a bunch of the kind of telemetry. Is that correct?
I mean, if the plot can be arbitrarily complex to draw.
Right.
If you don't want to draw it, you save up some time.
Well, I mean, I think it's useful to have the ability to close up. I mean, depending on what one's looking at, it could be that you don't. I mean, generally, my opinion is people want to see this progress information. Okay, if you're sitting there and your screen is, and nothing's happening for 5 minutes, much better that you see the progress than not. And I can't see why people would close it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I suppose we could have something that closes the whole progress thing. What's the reason why people might close the progress thing? I mean, I'm having a hard time coming up with a reason.
The only reason is, I mean, as long as like the single line of the overall progress is in there, they might just want something a bit less noisy on their screen. But I don't know that it's super essential. This was something
people are used to noisy crud on their screens from using the web. I mean, look, I don't know. The closing thing, it might be useful. It's not clear to me. I mean, given that, maybe it's better to have a complete close button for the whole progress indicator. Like for whatever reason, somebody doesn't want to see progress. And I don't quite know why, but maybe there's a case for that. Maybe somebody on the live stream might want to comment on that.
Well, that would be yet another button. So that's interesting. That's, I don't think, a button we considered.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so I think we have what we need here. You like this overall design. We don't need a collapser necessarily.
Right.
Okay, so buttons. So
actually, there's a question from Ethan on our live stream about themes for this. And one of the questions is fitting into different style sheets of notebooks. I mean, dark mode and all that kind of stuff.
So the short answer is we certainly have no support for themes at the moment. I'm not sure, and the current state of the code, I don't think it would be super easy to add, which isn't to say that I'm opposed to adding that support. It's just,
I have a simple question. From the notebook style sheet, what flows through to these progress boxes? Is it defined in a style in the overall style sheet?
It's defined by a style in core.nb because I think we're using 9 patches here. Is that right?
No, not really. I'm using some code that Design gave to Tally for the first iteration of this. Is actually hard coded, but for the final version, we already decided that we are going to move to front end assets.
Right. So we could, right. So I guess these styles they're just color directives then. They're not things like 9 patches or
Okay, fine.
PNGs.
So then
Yes.
that means it could be handled in a style sheet, and it's just a named style. And
Yeah.
if somebody makes the dark mode style sheet, they can just change the named style for progress boxes or something.
Right.
Okay. Oh, that's a good point from Brian here. Doing a demo or a screen recording, you might not want the progress indicator. That is a good example. Yes, that is a good example.
We have a tentative option to disable it for the function that they're going to use it.
Right. So you'd have.
Well,
sort
my
of
concern about that is that you might not know, and there might be functions which don't bring it up until they've been running for 15 seconds or something, and then suddenly in the middle of your demo, it pops up with this thing. So, I mean, there's an argument, just like we're talking about show progress, there's an argument for a quiet-like mechanism that just says don't show progress in this whole, switch off progress for this whole area.
Right. Well, I think if we just made the default value of this option to be, dollar progress reporting or whatever, then you could set that to false.
Yes. I mean, one could imagine it as a style sheet option for the notebook.
You could. It would be a little funky, right? Because then the evaluation would have to somehow know what notebook it's in and consult that notebook.
Right. I want to ask a question which Seth is also asking on the live stream about the thing moving your notebook view. When the progress indicator comes up, does it come up once and not change size, or what happens when? I mean, presumably the progress indicator doesn't come up for the first 5 seconds or something.
I think it's 2 seconds, but
the default delay is 2 seconds, but it's customizable when you use it.
Okay, but so as a practical matter, I'm typing something. I've got my thing. I'm typing in the next cell, and then the thing comes up. Does it move down where I'm typing? It does, doesn't it?
What does it move down mean?
Okay, so what I'm saying is, if I'm typing, okay, so this is a front end question, right? If I'm typing somewhere and a progress indicator comes up above me, okay, does it move me down, or does the content of the notebook push upwards? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I see. So you're asking, which way does the viewport move?
Yes.
Not about keyboard focus, but about the viewport.
No, I'm assuming we're not. If we lost keyboard focus, we'd be dead in the water. I'm assuming we do not lose keyboard focus.
I think the principle is that the front end should go to somewhat great lengths to make sure that your insertion cursor while you're typing stays where it is on your screen. And if the notebook needs to reflow around it, then it reflows around it, leaving.
Right. But so then what you'd see is the content at the top of the notebook would move up to make room for the progress indicator that arrived above your typing.
That's what I claim the principle should be. I don't know what the current behavior is.
I think it's the opposite. If you, I don't know if you can get stuff in the chat, Stephen, but if you try this, which is kind of a minimal prototype of it, then, I mean, at least to my front end, it moves up.
Okay, so I do that, and now what I'm doing is no, wait a minute. That moved down as I was typing. It didn't move.
Yeah, sorry, I said up, but I meant down. Yes, sorry, it moves down.
All right. I mean, I have to say, I have not found this deeply annoying at this point. So
I never realized this actually, and specifically, never was aware of this up and down thing. So it never really reached my upper brain, I guess.
Right. I mean, okay. Okay, so Sandra is asking, will one only see one dialogue at a time? I think no, you might see several because it might be nested.
Yes, and this is the chain evaluation section that we had there. So there are few possibilities for this, and
I personally think you've got to show them when it nests. You've got to show them as
the alternative is what we have. Like the first alternative is there. Like we kind of if you know in advance, like for example, if you're writing a function and you know that there are multiple progress indicators, you can actually give this information and they will be collected. The alternative design is the last one, where you kind of, whenever you have a nested indicator, you don't know in advance, but you attach it below.
Or there's the easiest to implement, which is each one just pops into an existence and pops out on its own, unless you go to the trouble of somehow combining them.
I mean, personally, I'm not unhappy about that. I think there's too much visual space between them here, but I think in terms of, in the case where you're generating a giant stack, I mean, it depends on how chatty things become. But at least right now, when these are fairly sparse, it doesn't seem problematic to stack them like that.
You can reprint on the same one if you want. It's among the possibilities of the utility. So if you know that you are doing different things, you can like what video is doing. Yeah, is updating the text, the video export. It's not giving. Also because it's sequential.
No, that's what it should do. When it's within one function, it should stick within one of these boxes. But the problem is if one function calls another function simply because, I don't know, you're doing file system scan. And each, the file system scan has one of these. It's saying it's scanning over 1,000 files. But each individual file you get to, you're doing a different thing to it.
Yeah. Or you could have, like a download within something else. Yeah.
So what's the proposal here?
We have this? Like what Carlo was suggesting once was that every system function basically prints in the same container indicator. So each time there's a new one, it will replace the old one and then just go like give back control when it's done. The alternative is to print all of them. And another alternative is that the outer one is kind of paying attention, and when an inner one kicks in, it will add the step thing or something like that.
I think that's going too complicated, and I think it's going to get tangled up. I think we're better off just having them be separate.
Perfectly fine with that.
I think. I don't think this aggregation. I think this could be super confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this is fairly clear what's going on. The only issue is if you see something that says loading data, loading data, loading data. Which data are you loading? What are you talking about?
But then I guess is there a possibility of, like, when we develop, we should be informative with...
Well, we need a style for what those things say. But the problem is, what if you're mapping, or worse, doing a parallel map across multiple... let's just talk about parallel stuff for a second. Okay, there have been a bunch of comments on our live stream about parallel. Are we going to be able to bring back progress indicators from parallel kernels? That's the first question.
I'm not sure. Well, that's going to be tricky. We certainly don't have anything for that now.
Well, I mean, what we have right now is the let's see, we have the parallel kernel status dialog, right? Which is just this thing, which is a little bit rickety in some ways. Why is it not? Okay. Oops, that's weird. See, I don't know. This is some weird dynamic thing. It scares me to have it even open.
Right.
That's something we have. I mean, that's a pretty heavyweight use of parallel kernels.
Right, but it's not telling you anything. I mean, it's telling you sort of if they're in use or not, but it's not telling you, it's not getting any data sort of directly out of there, out of those subkernels. And right, there isn't the
CPU time and things.
Right. But it's not right. It's not right. If you have a variable X that's being evaluated in that subkernel, that information is not here.
Absolutely. Right.
Right. This is all sort of information that's readily accessible to the master kernel. And the problem is, right, these are dynamics, which means they're communications between the kernel and the front end. And there isn't an obvious way for the subkernel to communicate with the front end, right? It doesn't have that link. So,
well, I mean, to be honest, if we actually really, really cared about this, we could use, we could use, for example, the channel framework to do this. we could have the subkernel throw a message, same way we do it for our web infrastructure. Although that's using a slightly different system, but we could throw it, we could throw these messages out into the channel system.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say this is related to echo from parallel kernels, and Roman plans on adding a variable that would determine whether the parent kernel came from a notebook session, so that.
Well, that's nice, but
that
what's he going to do with it? How's he going to get the information back? Is he sending it back over the WSTP link or what?
I don't know, but the goal is to be able to cell print the nice echo cells, even from a subkernel or a parallel.
Fair enough. Well, that's good, but I suggest looking at the channel framework as a possible way to do this. I think it's a robust way to do it. Rather than sending it back on the WSTP link with all kinds of weird back and forth stuff going on. Okay. Now let's see. I'm just Steve was saying on the live stream, don't make the mistake that Netscape made back in the day, where its ETA goes from 0 to 25 minutes to infinity to 0 to whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue. And of course, I mean, I think there's a certain homogeneity assumption that's being made. Like that parallel map monitor does surprisingly well. Even when there is some inhomogeneity in the computation times. I don't actually know how it works. It's a Max Piskunoff production of some kind. Don't know what he exactly did, but it seems to work quite well. I don't know what are we doing for the time remaining? How are we computing that? I mean, are those cases where we readily know that it is some fraction complete and so on?
I mean, you need to specify some form of progress. Either you give a progress key, or you say, I don't know, that I have a total byte count and a current byte count, something like that. And then we internally, the indicator keeps its best estimate of the current I mean, you know the time that has elapsed, and it gives the current best estimate of the total time that it will take, based on the progress, and that is updated whenever something changes.
Right. I mean, so
it has some history.
Let me give an example. If you're factoring integers or something, and you make a table, it is the case that the later integers in the table will take longer to factor, but we would not detect that probably with our current technology.
But unless you do semantic analysis on the code, there's actually.
Well, no, but I mean, the alternative would be some simple machine learning thing to look at, because to me, that would be a comparatively common case, that there's a loop and things are getting systematically, let's say, more difficult. And I bet.
Oh, yeah. Of course, we could fit a distribution on the time intervals and see that they are growing with a certain function.
Yes. Why not do that? I mean, if it's cheap to do it, we might as well do it and get a better estimate.
I plan. I mean, right now, what I have now is just moving average. But I confess, I just did some optimization at the beginning, and then I never went back to that. But for the final thing, especially when it's user facing, then we can provide like a more fancy estimation. That's not not problematic.
Ethan is asking, please add monitoring for parallel downloading. I see that the data, the transfer of data to parallel kernels. Yeah, I've noticed that doesn't show anything. Is that something we can do? I don't see why we shouldn't be able to do that. Do you understand the issue? Kernel communication. Okay, so what happens is, you're doing a parallel computation. You're getting results. They're coming back to the main kernel. You probably know in the WSTP transfer, you probably know what the total transfer size is, but it just hasn't arrived yet. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, but then the protocol needs a callback or something.
Well, I think the protocol has a bunch of those things.
I'm not familiar with that.
I don't think that WSTP. I mean, we're talking milliseconds, right? So
no, we're not. I've often been waiting for 5 minutes for that.
Because it's a remote kernel. I mean, there's just no way.
It's a lot of data. It's a lot
No.
of data. Well,
There just can't be that much data, right? The front end and kernel, right? You transfer, 200 megs, right? And that we're talking, milliseconds, maybe seconds. I just
Okay.
don't believe that WSTP can be that slow on a local machine. Now, if
No,
this is
these are remote,
transport
but I
over
mean,
SSH,
they're
but
fast local connections. Well, okay, I don't know exactly. Maybe people on the live stream can comment on their experience there. Ethan particularly is talking about parallel downloading. I mean, I think that it's been taking time, but on my machine, but who knows? It might be something else that was taking the time. So question here. There was a suggestion here about nested indicators, seeing the top level sum of all the child indicators. The problem with that is I don't think, do we know that computably? Like, in other words,
yeah, this we gave it a lot of thought actually, and the big problem is if you are responsible for the whole pipeline, you can be fancy. If you these indicators may be like if a user builds up a function with indicators, then it might not be possible to know what will happen next. So let's say that I have an if, and if it fires, depending on the input, I download something.
Sure, I understand that. But the question here was, if each indicator exposed its, time ETA or something like that. Actually, even that's really hard. But if it said,
we could document in principle a list that contains all the remaining times, and you could sum it if you want. But
no, but that's not right. It's not right because things are nested within each other. It's not right. It's the same issue with profiling, right? In other words, it would be incorrect to take the sum of all the times of all those pieces and say that's the total time it's going to take. That will be completely wrong.
No, at the parallel, when they're in parallel, yes. When they're nested, no. Yes, exactly.
Right. I don't think it can be done. I don't think there's a way to give an aggregate time, even if we knew it, even if we could computably expose it from each of the progress indicators. Okay. All right. So what's the question here? So I think we're saying just have these be separate and nest as they nest, so to speak, and don't try to be too clever here.
Okay. So we need to go up because you skipped over buttons, and that's a big question.
Okay.
Right. So here are.
Oh, yes.
Right. So an abort button is something we can always give, right? Because that's just command dot. I suppose there can be badly behaved code that doesn't respond to interrupts, but that, that's a bug that can be dealt with. Right. Then now some of the machine learning functions have this stop button, which, say stop the training now and return what you have.
Stop and return.
Right, basically. But we definitely need special support for that in the underlying code.
It's super useful when we can do it.
Right. And so the question is, should we always have them? Should we have one and then the other? Should we only have the stop when it's available? Should we have one that sort of can be one or the other?
What are we doing right now? I mean, right now I've been pretty happy with the way the stop works for the machine learning stuff. Where is it, in fact, right now?
It's a big button at the end of the grid.
You can
right,
go
but that's because they have special support for it, right? So they can opt into it.
No, I understand. I'm just asking visually where it is.
Just say time goal like 10 or 20, so the progress it will train for that time, and we can see the indicator for a while. It's like time goal times something. Yep.
Time goal to 10, 20, say. Okay. Well, that's very obvious what that does. It doesn't make me think it's going to abort it.
Which is a bit unfortunate because their progress indicator is intercepting aborts. So if you press command period, you're going to see the same thing, which I'm not super happy about.
Yeah, I think that is a bug that we will.
Wait. So you press Command period. You're saying
run it again and abort it with the
Okay.
keyboard.
I see. So that did a stop, basically.
Exactly. There's a check abort, which is redirecting the abort command to the similar result of pressing the stop button.
Why is that bad? I mean, wouldn't it be beautiful if functions would just let you abort them? I mean, I guess that what happens if it was nested inside something else? Will the abort be caught and then not propagate to the other things as well?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's a problem.
It's a different semantic than the typical abort. So,
but I don't understand why every computation one's doing shouldn't be bringing up. If the computation is running for a long time, there should be some UX. I mean, in the cloud, isn't there UX that brings up an abort button if the computation is running for a long time? It's in the header bar, isn't it?
Right. Well, there's an abort button. But not a stop button.
No, I understand that. That. I'm saying I think that the abort button should be nothing to do with the progress dialogues, because I think, particularly in a situation where you have 5 nested progress dialogues and they've all got aborts, all the aborts do the same thing, it's going to be super confusing. I think abort should not be part of this.
Okay.
And I think that what is the case is that there should be, probably in the new standardized notebook toolbar, there should be an abort thing that's offered to you if your computation took more than a certain number of seconds.
Sure.
Makes sense? I think that's how we should handle abort. I strongly think that shouldn't be part of this.
Okay.
And I think...
So basically, we either have no button or a stop button if the function has opted into offering that.
Yes, but the question is, where does the stop button go? And I think, it will be a minority of functions that have the stop possibility.
Yep.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's return partial results. Stop and return.
Does it make more sense as an accept button?
No way. Nobody will understand what that means.
Or like end or something like that.
No, I think stop is the right word, but I think it might need something, stop and return or some such other thing.
Mm-hmm.
It might stop and not return, right? If the function is just changes some variable. I'm not sure we can make the assumption that it returns something.
What do you mean?
If the function is stable and it sets a variable.
But the table won't offer the stop. The table won't offer this button. Only things that opt into it will offer this button.
Sure. Say I write my function, my table, that does, or my function, whatever, that just modifies the value of a variable. That doesn't necessarily return anything, right? Just has a side effect.
I see.
What's the point you're making? That there's a side effect?
I'm not sure we can make the assumption that pressing stop will return something.
Well, it will return, yes, I guess that's true, but it will return whatever it wouldn't, right? But it would still return the same thing it would have returned had you gotten to the end,
yes,
right?
Yes, correct.
So, right, so we could call it, we could call it stop and use current, or, I know that's a bit verbose, or stop and use current results. It's a bit verbose, but it would be clear. And if we only, if we want to keep it at the bottom, like we've had it up till now, we would certainly have the room for something verbose like that.
Well, so your point is, right now, the stops that we have are all side effectless stops. We will know if they're side effectless. Well, obviously you could put in the machine learning thing, you could put something which for an option, its monitoring function could have some weird side effect, but we'll assume that if you do that, it's kind of up to you. So the issue is, I mean, which functions are actually going to have a stop button now?
Initially, we're talking about the machine learning functions because they're the only ones which have really implemented this functionality.
You know, Andre on our live stream is complaining about the internationalization of the word stop, but I have to say, I have seen signs that are octagonal red signs that have the word stop on them in places all over the world. So I have to believe of all the different English phrases that might be understood, that's one of the better ones. Particularly if we had if we had anything octagonal there, we're very clear. I claim.
I did some experiments with Rob and Oliver in early stopping of PD's integration, where, for example, you want to end dissolve for 10 seconds, and when you stop, you get the first 5 seconds of a solution.
Yes.
That's doable. I mean, that's already doable, and I have some demos with that. But
okay, so that's the next thing that might be coming after machine.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, I can imagine optimization code where you can, you get better, you refine more route finding, you refine more as you.
It could be also that you are. I don't know if Sean or Carlo, can we early stop a video, export transcoding, and just have a shorter video?
I am not sure that is possible at the moment.
No, but in principle, is it possible to just say...
That sounds reasonable because we just...
I think it depends on the codec, right? Some codecs will, I mean, it'll still be usable if you just end the frames, and other codecs will be like, this is a corrupt file.
Yes.
I mean, if we use something that makes sure to finalize the writer on a board, that should be possible.
I mean, because this is not an abort, yeah. So what machine learning is
doing
stop.
Is
Let me ask a visual question, okay? If that was an octagon, would people know what it was without words?
If it were a red octagon, I think they would. I'm not sure if it were a blue octagon, they would know.
And we do use the square for audio video. That's not an uncommon symbol for stop. Right? I don't think it's
but
better
that's
than
a
an
stop.
octagon.
Fair enough, but that's a stop where you're pausing and you can restart. Right? A stop in video is a stop that can be restarted. This is not that. I mean, gosh, it's not really. Yeah, go ahead.
We don't really have a stop for audio and video. We just have the concept of pause there. However, in audio capture, there is a stop button that functions exactly like this. You press it and it returns something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a super confusing thing for ages, the way audio capture works. I hope that's been cleaned up.
It still is. It has been cleaned up, but yeah.
Okay, so right now, this is just giving me the opportunity to capture, right?
Right.
By the way, why did this not expand in size when I did 150%?
Oh, this is being fixed right now. We are switching to vector assets, so the magnification will work.
Okay,
correctly.
so I'm now recording hello, hello, hello. And then that means stop and return. So that iconography meant, it's very silly. Okay, so that iconography that we had there, so that means ready to record. That means that icon there is stop and return.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the silliest icon for stop and return. I mean,
Yeah.
if one saw that icon over here, I kind of think one would have an idea. I think one would have an idea what that meant.
Right, and I would argue, first of all, I think that's a reasonable one, and second of all, unlike abort, which throws away everything you've done, right, these will save results. So it's not catastrophic if people.
Well, it would be catastrophic if you spent 2 hours doing training and then you press that button and you lose everything else you were doing.
But you're not losing everything else you were doing, right? That's the whole point of this button. If it were an abort button, it would be catastrophic. But the stop button, right? And you can always resume the training. You can, in fact, resume the training, right? You can take that data and refine it.
yes, that's correct. But this indicator panel is gone by that time. You will not see. As soon as you press this button, the indicator panel will disappear.
Mm-hmm.
That's a close button for the indicator panel and for the computation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we have on the table is, see, again, it depends a lot on whether you're going to see this as the only thing you're seeing on your screen, possibly with a very heavyweight, display like the thing we were seeing over here, right?
Mhm.
Where, this is a giant heavyweight display, and having a big stop button there seems, still not great. I mean, I didn't understand. I mean, I had to actually try this to know that this meant stop and return partial results. I mean, if I were going to do this, I would say, a stop button and then say stop, paren, and return partial results.
As a tooltip, I mean, that would be enough for me. The button stop at the tooltip has.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Return partial results.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, the tooltip says stop and return partial results. Well, now the question is, for a big panel like that, having a stop button is fine. For something like this, where it's a minimized panel, I would think that having that circle and with a square inside it would be reasonable with a tooltip.
With the tooltip, same tooltip. I think that works.
Okay, fine. I mean, we could repeat the iconography by having that icon as part of the button that says stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, fine. We got a plan there. Everybody happy with that?
Yep.
For the buttons? Okay, good. All right, what else do we have to figure out here?
Right. So this is just sort of talking about what we still need to do. So obviously we need to implement the decisions we made today. But I think this is all, except maybe for that last point, I think this is all pretty straightforward.
What is this? The correct evaluation cell cannot be triggered targeted from a scheduled task. What does that mean?
The problem is, if when you have these indicators, you want, especially when you have a delay, you want to be super efficient, because the idea is if the computation is going to be short and you don't know in advance, like a very fast export, you don't want any overhead at all. And but if it is long, you want to actually print the indicator just underneath the cell which is doing the computation.
Right.
I just got distracted by a comment on our live stream from Brian, who suggests the phrasing "end now." Well, complete now isn't going to work because you don't know whether that's a noun or a verb. I mean, an adjective or a verb. But end now as opposed to stop is sort of interesting. Look, I think stop and return as a tooltip is probably the better solution. I worry that end now, it's again, you don't know whether that's a description or a command. Mm-hmm. It is the end. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I distracted from the scheduled task discussion. Please go on.
So let me back up Giulio's explanation a bit, which is, suppose you rather than evaluating a single cell, you select a whole section and evaluate 7 input cells at once. Then the normal print temporary rather will trigger at the bottom of the last input cell selected rather than the currently evaluating cell. Is that the correct description?
I mean, it depends on where you call print temporary. Print temporary does the right thing. The problem is that we don't want to do it immediately. We want to delay it. If we print immediately, we don't have this problem.
Oh, so right.
The issue is you've got a stack of cells. You say to evaluate all of them, and the question is, when the temporary display starts coming up, where does it come up? Does it come under the...
Exactly.
Right, so it comes under the currently evaluating cell rather than the cell that created the progress panel.
What do you mean by the evaluation?
Right, so
let's say you have like five cells. You run like pose 5, pose 5, pose 5, and one in the middle has a progress indicator. So the point is that the progress indicator can appear immediately or can appear after a little time.
How do I make a progress indicator?
Just do evaluate with evaluate with progress of that.
Kind of suggesting that this should be a user level thing. What's the context for evaluate with progress?
Progress backtick.
Kind of suggests this should be a user level thing, but anyway.
I mean,
okay.
it will be. It's the final point of the to-do list, but
Okay, fine.
we need to sort out details first. So the point is like do that and then create another pose 5 below. No, you just need one, and you can have another pose 5 below that, and then evaluate them together.
Here, you're saying, well, I'm going to, just to confuse it even more, I'm going to put a second one of those in.
Yeah.
All right, so now you say I select all of these.
Exactly. So there's not immediate, but there's a 2 seconds delay. No, wait, this is solvable, and I know how to solve it, because you can track whatever cell started the evaluation. The point is, it's not free. It has a considerable overhead, which, I don't know, Sean is going to kill me if I make a fast export take 0.2 seconds more, because I need to ask the front end in which cell it's starting. So, I mean, the solution is not efficient. That's the problem.
Well,
so,
okay. You're asking an engineering question. I bet there are other solutions, maybe something with a channel framework, maybe something with some, I mean, you've got to pass back information, basically, to the front end.
Well, we need to, no. The problem isn't passing back the information. The problem is gathering the information when you might not need it.
I understand. That's why it needs to be, okay. The question is which cell it is evaluating. Doesn't the front end know that internally?
Can you start gathering after the delay? The information.
Yes, the front end knows it. Yes, the front end knows it while you're evaluating.
So can't you just expose that with a current value, for example?
Well, anything that requires a front end callback is going to have some overhead. I think the only suggestion that I've heard that I liked was from Constantine in I think our last meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago, where he suggested the front end send it as part of the bulk of information that it sends with each evaluation. So the kernel is always kept up to date with what the current evaluation cell is. But of course, that requires changes to the front end kernel contract that will be implemented at some low level.
Well, I think that's the thing to think about. I mean, that it would just send the ID of the cell. I mean, isn't there going to be a cell UUID? Couldn't it send this? I bet that's useful.
Right. That is effectively the cell object. In the new world,
send the whole cell object. Just has to send the ID.
The cell object is probably going to be the symbol cell object wrapped around a UUID. So that is the whole cell object.
I see. Well, I personally support the idea of sending that to the kernel. I think it's useful. I think that will have other uses that have nothing to do with this. I predict.
Likely, yep.
And I think it's something where the there should be a variable, perhaps the current value variable, perhaps something else that is the currently evaluating cell UUI.
Well, right. I mean, that can already be obtained. The difficulty here is because of the scheduled task that's involved with how we're delaying this progress, that we've missed the window that we can ask for the evaluation cell.
Okay, fine. So it's got to be sent preemptively.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Is there any? Okay. Switch to the terminal. Okay. All right. Wow. Really? Okay. Okay. Fine. So is there anything we need to say about the terminal window stuff? The things we've talked about here, like for example, the stop button. Is it going to say type period to stop or something? How's it going to handle the stop button?
That is a good question, which I don't think we have an answer for.
I think you should say press period to stop. Or some such other thing. I mean, I don't know whether you want it to be a command key or whether you just want it to be.
If you can intercept keys, then yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we can intercept keys. I don't know that we can intercept keys while an evaluation is in progress. I mean, other than
keys.
Other than the board and interrupt, and I guess Control C, which is
I mean, you
and
can.
interrupt.
What you certainly can do. I mean, amusingly, SMP did this back in 1979 or something. You know, in at least in Unix, right? You can press Control C and you can bring up a you can bring up a line that says press A to abort, you know, Q to quit, etc.
Right, and yes, and the question is, can we hijack that, or can we? Right, but that's the question is, can somebody other than, you know, me and Constantine going in and writing C code do that? I'd rather not do that.
Probably need C code to do it, but that's okay. But fine, go investigate that. But I think we need a solution for how to deal with the stop button on the terminal.
Okay.
Kernel propagation.
Right. So these are ones where they've already, you know, are using.
Right. So to me, the user-facing function, I don't know what the relationship between the show progress wrapper for an individual thing and the evaluate with progress. I think there's really the evaluate with progress, I see, is a user-defined thing where you give it some callbacks and so on, right?
Right. So the evaluate progress is what we need people to integrate progress indicators into automatic progress indicators into their own functions.
Right.
Which is different from show progress, which is take this arbitrary expression and do something, guess what you can do with it.
I understand. Both being useful.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Those are just links that you don't really need
okay,
to go
so
to.
we're pretty much done here. And we've got another live stream actually coming up for LCC, which also involves some of the same people.
Yep.
They're starring the same cast of characters, partly. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, Ethan is just asking about pause continue. I believe that I do not think that's worthwhile for these things we have here.
Yeah. Yeah, the only, right. So, I mean, the only thing we can offer without major engineering resources is entering dialogue. And I'm not sure we want to go that route.
I see. Where you could potentially see what's going on. Because that's the only case I mean, if you can't see what's going on, pause continue is useless.
Right.
Would entering a dialogue work, or will it be bizarre because things are left in unfinished states and so on?
I mean, that depends on what is actually in charge. Like if it's a purely kernel operation, then yes. If it is a library operation, then it depends. Like, is the library supporting stop and resume, like pause and resume? Otherwise, I mean, if you're launching an external library which has download, the download can probably go ahead, even if a kernel is frozen. So that depends. If it is a purely kernel thing, I did some experiments and it's kind of working. The usefulness it depends, actually.
I mean, so that would be another thing associated with the stop button, would be an additional button that's some kind of inspection button.
Yeah.
Right. But then, right, people would need to know to call return to, or we'd need to provide another button.
We could put that in the, I mean, what would it do? It would bring up a dialogue sub notebook, basically. I mean, it's within that notebook. It would bring up the kind of the dialogue, a newly headed piece of notebook that is the dialogue. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean,
well, no. It's the kernel entering dialogue, right? It's
Yep.
the same as what is it? Command option period, right? If you do pause of 5, yeah,
Well,
or just evaluating dialogue, right?
What did that just do? Help.
Yeah, then you can just type other things, and you're in a subkernel.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. So now,
what just happened here? I mean, I see. That's some kind of fuzzy line there.
Yeah.
Type return.
Yeah.
No, I understand that, but this is utterly unclear, if I might say so. I mean, this was probably good in when this was the only thing we could do, but this has got to be a lot chattier.
Yeah. So
this,
right.
this should have some temporary cell there until you start typing at least. And now, bizarrely, I type return. Bizarre.
Mhm.
There was additional indentation in the text terminal, but not here.
What did it do in the text terminal?
It added a few more spaces before the in, so you could see that you are in Dialog.
Okay, so this is pretty cruddy. I mean, this to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has not been refreshed in 25 years at least.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Well,
I wasn't convinced that this use. So I think even if we wanted to do this, we need to invest in.
Yeah, I think this is for the future. This is not for version 1 of the progress indicator stuff. And to my mind, the if we were to do this, we would have to indicate how to get, when you enter the dialogue, we would have to have some material there that says, this is the what am I trying to say? That tells you things about how you can interrogate this computation. All right, we should wrap up here. I'm going to go straight to the LCC live stream. So those watching, we're going to switch to a different channel, but we'll be back in a moment. And thank you to people working on this project and to people who are commenting. See you all in a moment.
Bye.
Bye.